Okay, in this session, we will speak about some important security considerations. And these considerations, it will be split per the type of the service. For example, in the IaaS or IaaS, we have some problems as, for example, multi-tenancy. And multi-tenancy, this means that you have multiple users, they are working on shared resources. You have a host and a server, in other words, a server. This server it is split or it is configured into multiple VMs, and there are different users on these VMs, and this means that on a single server you have multiple users and customers who are using the service. And of course, this is not secure because you must to provide a powerful isolation method between these customers. Then we will not be able to see each other's data, services, and applications, and so on. This is one of the security considerations. And again, one of the main points for protecting against the multi-tenancy risks, it will be the encryption. If you have data encrypted, then this means that it will be secure. Of course, we have other different methods, and these methods, it can be covered in the course for the CCSP or the Certified Cloud Security Professional. Again, some points which we discussed before as hypervisor security and attacks, co-location, and so on. And we covered this before when we said that we have multiple types of hypervisor, and the hypervisor, it will be very critical if anyone who was able to hijack or take a control over the hypervisor, then this means that he would be able to access the VMs and maybe the data also hosted by the VMs as well. Network security, virtual machine attacks, virtual switching. Virtual switching, it is the same concept as the physical switches attacks. They are exactly the same. When if you have a virtual machine, then all the layer 2 and layer 3 attacks, which are the physical switch is subject for, it will be again valid for the virtual switches. But with the virtual switches, we have one additional point that we don't have a real switch. We don't have a real switch. This physical switch, virtual switch, it utilizes the resources of the host. Then it can create a virtual host. Then it will be able to switch the data and the information between multiple hosts. And finally, the denial of service. Denial of service, again, this is one of the main concerns for the security administrators. And when I say denial of server, it's not only the concept of the network denial of service as distributed denial of service. It can be, for example, the processor denial of service, memory denial of service, application denial of service, whatever the type of denial of service. But by the end of the day, just you have to understand that this, it will be the concept of service unavailability. Service unavailability, whatever the reason. Whatever the reason, it's a processor, it's a memory, it's a storage, it's bandwidth, network, and so on. When we come to the PaaS, we have again some security consideration which you have to take in our consideration in the cloud service hosting models as a system isolation. This is very important. What do you mean by system isolation? As we mentioned, the PaaS, it's the platform as a service, and this it will provide you the platform to develop your applications. What we are saying here, you must have total isolation between the system, the servers, the hardware, and so on, and the platform. When, for example, if you have .NET application, then you have full control over this platform. You are able to develop your applications, libraries, and so on. But you should not have any access to the servers, because access to the servers, it can create a problem for the cloud service provider. The cloud service provider, he is responsible to provide the service for you for the infrastructure. If you're having, for example, administrator account, then you will be able to change configuration, services, operating systems, and so on. This it will create a problem for the cloud service provider. He will not be able to fulfill his service level agreement with you because each user he will have his own configuration, and each user he will have his own settings and so on. But this means that if the cloud service provider we want to provide this service for the systems for the different customers, we have to understand the different settings of these customers, and this almost impossible. When we have to make standard configuration, this for the systems, and no one will be able to change it rather than the cloud service providers. User permissions, it's again one of the important points where the user must have the appropriate permissions for accessing the application, the services. If you have a user, he is able to access the platform for development, then you should not give him a permission for testing the application, for example. And this depends upon how you are configure the permissions for administrators, permission for developers, permission for users and testers, and so on. User access. The user access, it's important issue, and it's related to how the user will be access the applications or the developed application or the service which you provide to him. The authorization, the authentication. Of course, here when you will say user access mainly we mean the access controls. Mainly we mean the access controls as we defined since few minutes. The IaaS is the identification, authentication, authorization, and accounting. Finally, you have the malware, trojans, backdoors, and the administration nightmares. Yes. What is the backdoors? These backdoors, it's a concept which is used by developers while they are developing their systems. We are saying, okay, we are in the process of developing an application, and we are not sure that it will work fine. We may face some problems, and in some situation we may be blocked, and we are not able to authenticate ourselves as administrators. Then we have to take control over the application code or application itself. Well, what we are doing, we will create a backdoor in the code when we will be able to access the application without any authentication or authorization. Just this code, or sorry, backdoor, we will be able to use it. It may be a script, it may be whatever the method which we configured during the coding of the application, but we will be able to access this service or the code, and we can do whatever we want. Just imagine if this backdoor, if it's not removed from the application and there is any hacker who was able to reach to this backdoor, then this it will create a nightmare for the security administrator, because this means that you will have a control over the application. Then even if he is smart, he will not do anything, but he will collect the data, and he can stay for a long time, as we are called them APT or advanced persistent threads, and they are sitting idle for a long time, just collecting data and doing nothing. You are not feeling that there is any hacker in your network, but actually there are a lot of them, and we are collecting data, and this because we utilized the backdoor which was created by the developers. Finally, for the SaaS, the web application security, data policy, and data protection and confidentiality. Of course, you know, in the SaaS, as we mentioned, most of the applications are accessed through web browsers, or they are web applications. And web application, unfortunately, they are very famous due to the problems and the attacks which they are subject for. And you may heard about the OASP. The OASP. The OASP, it's a non-profit organization which is make OASP. OS, a non-profit organization, and it's trying to make study for the web browser and figure out the important attacks for the web applications. And usually they have a list of top 10 attacks. Top 10 attacks, and if you go through these attacks, you will find that it's not secure to have your application over the web if it's not secured and you have the appropriate safeguards and controls to protect against these security attacks and security problems. Data policies, what will be the data policy? If you have a SaaS, then this means that you have your data is stored in the cloud service provider. You have to provide the appropriate policies for the users. Whatever the user, he will be read write, he will be able to delete, he will be able to change, and so on. This it depends upon the business needs and the required permissions and authorities assigned to each user. Finally, the data protection. Finally, the data protection and confidentiality, which is one of the most important security consideration in the SaaS, where the data it should be encrypted, it should be isolated, especially we are working in multi-tenants and there are a lot of users and customers sharing the same resources. We can have look on your data or it can be leaked and so on. But it should be encrypted, it should be isolated, and it should be protected. This it can be by a lot of methods. It can be using the encryption, it can be using by strong access control, it can be using by the network isolation, it can be used by firewalls. There are a lot of data protection methods which you can speak about, and for example, DLP, the data loss protection applications, and so on. Any questions?